The courtroom in Redwood Harbor smelled like old wood and fresh fear. I stood at the defendant's table, hands flat on the surface to stop them from shaking. My husband, Graham Vale, stood a few feet away, and the rage on his face was nothing new to me, but screaming it in open court, that was new. "She's mentally ill," he shouted, loud enough that the people behind me went quiet all at once. A woman in the front row flinched. I felt my throat burn because I knew exactly what he was doing. He had been calling me unstable for months, always right after he pushed me to tears, always right before he comforted me in front of others. It was a script he had rehearsed. Then, Judge Celeste Rourke lifted her eyes slowly from the file in front of her. She looked at Graham the way a storm looks before it breaks, still, heavy, and dangerous. "Do you have proof?" she asked. Graham smiled like he had been waiting his whole life for that question. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Actually, yes." My eyes landed on the logo in the corner of that envelope. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. Graham handed the envelope to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Rourke. Inside was a psychological evaluation, a formal document claiming I had severe mental instability. My hands shook as my attorney, Tessa Ward, leaned in close to read it with me. I had never been evaluated at that clinic. I had never walked through its doors. I had never spoken to anyone there. Yet my name was on every page, neat and official looking. Tessa whispered, low enough that only I could hear, "This is either a miracle or a forgery." Judge Rourke studied the document carefully, her eyes moving slowly across the signature line. Something in her expression shifted, not alarm exactly, but sharpened attention. "We will verify this," she said, setting the papers down. Graham's lawyer, Dane Kessler, grinned from across the room like a man who had already won. My heart sank. But then, the judge scheduled an immediate verification hearing, which meant that document would not simply sit in a file unchallenged. As we filed out of the courtroom, Dane stepped close to me and murmured so quietly it felt like a threat wrapped in silk. "If you fight this, we'll make sure your daughter never forgets you." I followed Graham into the hallway, keeping my voice low because our daughter Lyra was nearby with Graham's mother. I wanted answers. I wanted him to look me in the eye and explain himself. But the moment I stepped toward him, something changed in his face. The anger disappeared. His shoulders dropped. His voice went soft and full of fake concern. "See?" he said to a passing staff member, gesturing at me. "She's escalating." I felt cold all over. He was performing. He was always performing. I had watched him do it 100 times, turn his cruelty into concern the second someone else was watching. My hand moved to my phone before I even thought about it. I pressed record and slid it back into my pocket. Tessa, standing a few steps behind me, noticed. She gave me one small, steady nod, like permission. Graham leaned in, voice dropping to a hiss. "One more word and I'll have you committed." Then, just as quickly, he smiled at a nurse walking past. Every word of that threat was now saved on my phone. That night, an email arrived from an unknown address. It contained a screenshot of my medical portal, and someone had already logged into my account. I opened my laptop with shaking hands and pulled up the portal. What I found there made my skin go cold. There were new therapy notes I had never written, symptoms I had never reported, an appointment from last week that I had never attended. Someone had been building a medical history for me, one that did not exist. I called the clinic immediately. The receptionist's voice was calm and certain. "We have you listed as high risk," she said. "Your husband confirmed your history." I sat there for a long moment after I hung up. Graham had called them. He had given them details, private details, the kind only a spouse would know, and pretended to be speaking on my behalf. He had been impersonating me, slowly and carefully for who knew how long. I called Tessa and told her everything. Her voice went quiet in a way that told me she understood exactly how serious this was. "This isn't just custody warfare," she said. "This is identity manipulation. We need proof he accessed your accounts. Start documenting everything." The next morning, I woke to pounding at my front door. 2 police officers stood on my porch asking to come in for a wellness check. Lyra grabbed my leg the moment she saw the officers' uniforms. I held her close and kept my voice steady, even though every part of me wanted to scream. I knew what was happening. I knew that any crack, any raised voice, any tears would become another piece of evidence. The officers were polite. They told me someone had called in a report that I was dangerous and confused. I asked who had called. They said they could not share that information. But then one of them glanced down at the report in his hand and added, quietly, "It came from a blocked number. It sounded rehearsed." I breathed through that. I asked both officers for their badge numbers. I wrote them down. I kept my phone visible and recording. I asked for a written copy of the report. I was calm. I was careful. I gave them nothing to use against me. After they left, my phone buzzed. A text from Graham. "See, even the police agree you need help." Below it was a calendar invite. The title read, "Psych Hold Intake Confirmed." He had already scheduled it. The trap had been built before the officers even knocked. Tessa arrived within the hour. I showed her the calendar invite and watched her jaw tighten. She explained the trap slowly. If I went to the psych intake, it would look like I was admitting something was wrong. If I refused, it would look like I was hiding. Either way, Graham won. "He designed it that way," I said. Tessa nodded. "Yes, he did." Then she asked something unexpected. "Did Graham ever ask you to sign anything right after Lyra was born?" I thought back to those blurry, exhausted weeks after delivery. A stack of papers on the kitchen table. Graham saying they were insurance forms. I had been so tired. I had trusted him completely. "Those forms may include medical release authorizations," Tessa said. "He might have used them to access your records all along." We went through my old files late into the night and found it, a signed document giving Graham full access to my medical information. But when I looked at the signature closely, something stopped me cold. My name was spelled wrong, but the signature was there. I stared at that signature for a long time. It looked like mine, the slope of the letters, the slight tilt to the right, but the pressure was wrong. The loops were too tight, too careful, like someone had studied my handwriting and practiced it slowly. Tessa leaned over my shoulder. "This is a traced signature," she said. We needed an expert, but we also needed a strong enough reason for Judge Rourke to grant us discovery, the legal right to dig deeper into Graham's records and actions. That was when I remembered the envelope from court, the evaluation with the Dead Clinic logo. That document was already under question. Tessa filed an emergency motion that same night, asking the court to formally authenticate the evaluation and freeze any further changes to my medical records. Judge Rourke granted the motion by morning, but Graham did not wait. Within hours, he filed for emergency custody, telling the court I was unmedicated and a danger to Lyra. He wanted her out of my home before any of our evidence could be heard. The clock was running faster now, and my daughter was caught in the middle of it. I was back in court before I had time to breathe. Graham arrived holding Lyra's stuffed bunny, her favorite one, the worn gray rabbit she slept with every night. He held it like a prop, like a costume. He told the judge that Lyra cried at night because Mommy talks to herself. I pressed my hands flat on the table. I wanted to stand up and shout that every word was a lie. Instead, I turned to Judge Rourke and said, as calmly as I could manage, "Your Honor, I have recordings." The courtroom went quiet. Tessa played the hallway audio. Graham's voice, low and sharp, threatening to have me committed. Then, immediately after, the sound of him switching to a pleasant tone for the passing nurse. Judge Rourke's expression changed. It was not dramatic. It was more like something had clicked into place behind her eyes. She looked at Graham's table and said, "Mr. Vale, bring the clinic representative, today." For the first time since this all started, I watched Graham's smile slip, just slightly, just for a second, but I saw it, and I held onto it like it was the first solid thing I had touched in months. The clinic representative appeared on a video screen at the front of the courtroom, stiff and clearly uncomfortable. Judge Rourke asked her questions in a slow, measured voice, as if each one had been chosen carefully. Who had requested the evaluation? Who had paid for it? Who had provided the intake history used to build the report? The representative shifted in her seat. Her answers came out in pieces, each one more reluctant than the last. The intake, she finally admitted, had been completed using a spouse release form and a phone call, someone who had called in to confirm my identity. Judge Rourke ordered the clinic to produce full records, call logs, IP login history, and payment information. That was when Dane Kessler objected. He objected loudly and forcefully, and more times than the situation called for. The courtroom noticed. I noticed. Judge Rourke set down her pen and looked at him with the kind of stillness that is worse than anger. "Counsel," she said slowly, "why are you panicking?" Dane's mouth opened and then closed. He had no good answer, and his reaction had just become part of the record. Outside the courtroom, Tessa pulled me into a quiet corner. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Dane is acting like this is personal," she said. "He's not just doing his job, he's protecting something." I thought about it. Then a memory surfaced, a photograph on Graham's shelf, years old, from some college event. Graham and Dane, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning. I had never thought much of it before. They were fraternity brothers. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I did not recognize. The message was short. "Look up Harbor Light Trust before he moves it." Attached was a blurry photo of Graham handing a folder to Dane outside a building I did not recognize. I searched the name. Harbor Light Trust was a private financial account, the kind used to move and protect large amounts of money, and when I dug further into the documents that came up, I found something that stopped the breath in my chest. My name was listed as a beneficiary. A trust I had never heard of, money I did not know existed, and my name sitting inside it like a secret Graham had forgotten to erase. I confronted Graham by text. I kept it short and direct. Why is my name on a trust I never knew about? His reply came back fast, too fast, like he had been waiting for the question. "Because you're sick, Mara. I was protecting you." Even through a phone screen, the cruelty of it hit me. He was using care as a weapon. He was packaging control as kindness. I had lived inside that packaging for years and had only recently learned to see it for what it was. Tessa's voice was firm when I called her. "If your name is on that trust, you have legal standing to demand the records. We file subpoenas today." We did. The paperwork went through by afternoon, and then, just before dinner, my phone rang, a number I did not recognize. A banker, speaking quietly, like someone checking over their shoulder. "Ms. Ellison," he said carefully, "I think you need to know, someone already tried to close the Harbor Light account this morning." Graham was moving. He had seen the subpoena coming, and he was trying to empty the account before we could get to it. We had hours, maybe less. Tessa and I drove to the bank branch together. My heart was pounding the whole way. The manager met us at the desk with an expression that told me everything before he said a word. Cautious, uncomfortable, like a man caught between two forces he did not want to choose between. He would not give us details, but his eyes said plenty. I asked him one question directly. Was it my husband who tried to close the account? The manager said, he had authorization paperwork. More forged signatures, more documents carrying my name that I had never touched. Tessa stepped forward and gave the manager the court motion number. She explained that the account was under judicial review and that any transfer would be considered obstruction. The manager hesitated for a long moment. Then, reluctantly, he agreed to freeze the transfer until verification was complete. As we turned to leave, he spoke again, quietly. He wasn't alone, the manager said. A woman was with him. He slid a business card across the desk, the card of the private banker who had witnessed the whole attempt, someone who had seen everything, someone who might be willing to say so. I met the private banker the next morning, off the record at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the branch. He described the woman who had come in with Graham, tall, auburn hair, confident in the way of someone who believes they belong everywhere they go. I knew who it was before he finished the description. Sloane Merritt, Graham's work friend, the woman he had mentioned casually 100 times, always in passing, always in a tone designed to make me feel foolish for noticing. I was not devastated by the affair. I had suspected it for a long time, and the hurt of it had already faded into something harder and quieter. What hit me now was different. This was not romance. This was partnership. They had walked into that bank together with forged paperwork and a plan. The banker agreed to sign an affidavit. He would name Sloane, he would confirm the withdrawal attempt, he would put it all on record. That evening, I came home and stepped into my building's lobby. The elevator doors were open. Sloane was standing inside them, waiting like she owned the place. Sloane smiled at me. It was the kind of smile that did not reach her eyes, polished and practiced like everything else about her. "I'm not your enemy," she said. I stepped into the elevator. I did not say anything. My hand moved to my coat pocket and pressed the record button on my phone. "You're just in the way," she continued, her voice calm and almost bored. "Graham said you were fragile, that you'd fold eventually." I looked at her steadily. "Tell him I'm done folding." The doors opened on my floor. I walked out without looking back. As soon as I was inside my apartment, I pulled out my phone to save the recording. My screen showed a notification I had not seen before, remote access enabled. The recording had not saved. Someone was mirroring my phone in real time. They had watched me press record. They had deleted it before it could become evidence. I sat on my kitchen floor for a moment, back against the cabinet, breathing slowly. Then I called Tessa. "He's been watching everything," I said. "I know. I'm calling someone tonight." Tessa brought in a digital forensics specialist named Jai Patel. He was quiet and careful, the kind of person who speaks only when he has something certain to say. He examined my phone for less than 20 minutes before he looked up. "Someone has mirrored your screen for weeks," he said. "Every call, every text, every search, they saw it as it happened." I felt exposed in a way that went deeper than embarrassment. My thoughts had not been private. My plans had not been secret. Every move I had made, every piece of evidence I had found, Graham had known about it in real time. But Jai was not finished. "We can track where the data was being sent," he said. "The spyware links to an email account, registered under a fake name." He worked quietly for another hour. Then he pulled up the recovery information. The recovery number tied to the fake email had to link somewhere real. It linked to a phone number. Jai looked at me. "Do you recognize this?" I did not, but Tessa did. She went very still. "That's Dane Kessler's office line," she said. Tessa presented the spyware evidence in court without drama. No raised voice, no theatrical pauses, just clean facts laid out in order. The email account, the fake name, the recovery number, the connection to Dane Kessler's office. Dane objected. He objected loudly, and then again with a slightly different argument, and then once more with a desperate edge in his voice that the entire room could hear. Judge Rourke waited until he was finished. Then she ordered Dane to submit his office devices for forensic review, directly related to the case. The courtroom went completely silent. I looked at Graham. For weeks he had sat in that room with the ease of someone who believed he had already won. Now his face had changed. Something underneath the composure had given way. He looked like a man standing on ice that had just begun to crack. Then he turned to Dane, and Dane whispered something to him, something I could not hear across the room, but I saw Graham's eyes flash with a fury that was different from before, colder, more panicked. His partner had just become his biggest problem. That evening, Tessa's phone rang. It was Dane, calling her personal cell, not her office line. He had been watching us closely enough to have that number. "Let's settle," he said. Tessa told me everything afterward. Dane had offered full custody to me. No more psychological narrative, no more wellness checks. All he wanted was for the forensic review of his devices to go away. "Make the device order disappear," he said. I sat with that for a long time. If Dane was begging this openly, the forensic review was going to find something far worse than spyware, something that would not just damage his case, but end his career, maybe more.
Part of me wanted to say yes. I was exhausted. I missed feeling safe in my own home. I missed sleeping through the night without checking the locks twice. But I thought about Lyra, and I thought about every other woman who might one day face exactly what I had faced. "No," I told Tessa, "I want the truth on record." The next day, the clinic sent an urgent update to the court. The signature on the psychological evaluation belonged to a clinician who had been dead for 2 years. The courtroom erupted. People spoke over each other. The clinic representative on the video screen stammered something about a template error. Judge Rourke raised one hand and the noise stopped completely. Tessa stood up. Her voice was quiet and precise. "Your Honor," she said, "a template error does not explain a dead person's signature on a current document." Judge Rourke looked at the screen. Then she looked at Dane. Then she looked at Graham. She referred the document for a full fraud investigation and issued immediate sanctions. The weight of what was happening seemed to press down on the whole room. Graham sat very still. He had spent months building a version of me that the court would believe, unstable, unreliable, dangerous. And now that version was crumbling piece by piece in front of everyone. As we left the courthouse, Graham appeared at my side. There were no staff nearby, no performance to give. He dropped his voice to something flat and ugly. "If I go down," he said, "I'm taking you with me." Then he smiled, thin and cold. "Check your email," he said. I opened my inbox and felt the floor tilt beneath me. There were emails sent from my own account using my own name to my employer, to my closest friends, to Lyra's school. The subject lines read, "They're watching me," and "Lyra isn't safe." The messages inside were rambling and frightened. They sounded exactly like what Graham had been trying to convince everyone I was. He had sent them while pretending to be me. I called Jai immediately. He pulled the metadata within the hour and confirmed what I had already begun to hope. The emails had been sent during times when I was physically inside the courthouse. The building's security system had logged my entry and exit. The timestamps matched perfectly. I was not in 2 places at once. Someone else had sent those emails from my account, and the courthouse security logs proved it. Tessa said we could prove the impersonation, but we needed the courthouse security footage to lock it down completely. Then her phone rang. She listened for a moment, and her expression shifted.
The footage file is corrupted. Someone got to it first. Judge Rourke was not a woman who showed anger easily, but when the courthouse IT director stood before her and explained that the security footage had been tampered with, something in her face went very quiet and very hard. She ordered an internal audit. She pulled in the courthouse's own technology team. She made it clear, without raising her voice, that someone had made a serious mistake by treating her courtroom like a place where evidence could simply be erased. I sat at the table and thought about what Tessa had said weeks ago, that reckless people make mistakes. Graham had been careful for so long, careful with the documents, careful with the clinic, careful with the wellness checks and the calendar invites and the traced signatures. But this, tampering with a courthouse's own security system, was the kind of move that came from panic. The IT team worked quietly for 2 days. Then a technician came forward. Someone had posed as an attorney's assistant and requested the footage file for legal copies. The security badge used to access the system belonged to Dane Kessler's firm. That same night, Dane's office reported a break-in. His computers had been stolen. Judge Rourke looked at the break-in report the way someone looks at a bad excuse from a child. She was not convinced. She was not even close to convinced. She ordered both Dane and Graham to appear for a contempt hearing and said nothing else on the matter, which was somehow more frightening than if she had yelled. Then Jai called me with news that made me press the phone tight against my ear. They took the computers, he said, but they forgot about the cloud sync. Everything that had been on those devices, every file, every folder, every draft, had been automatically backed up to a cloud account that the thieves had not touched. Jai recovered a folder simply titled Mara Project. Inside were drafted emails written in my voice, fake symptom scripts designed to sound like my words, a step-by-step timeline for triggering wellness checks, instructions for how to frame a concerned spouse's call to the police. My name written over and over in documents I had never touched as the subject of a plan I had never known existed. My hands trembled as I scrolled, not from fear, from the strange, overwhelming relief of being believed. Then I reached the last subfolder. It was labeled Lyra Leverage. I opened the subfolder and read what was inside. The words were organized and careful, which somehow made them worse. There was a plan to use Lyra's school records and her pediatric appointments to build a case of maternal neglect against me. One document outlined the specific language to use when reporting me to child services. Another tracked Lyra's schedule to identify the best timing. My daughter had been a strategy. Tessa's voice was shaking when she read it, not breaking, but right at the edge of breaking. She said it quietly. This crosses into criminal territory. She filed for an emergency protective order before midnight. She requested supervised visitation for Graham pending the full investigation. Both were granted. I sat in my living room after everything was filed and tried to breathe. Then Lyra's school called. The woman on the phone sounded apologetic and confused. Graham had arrived that afternoon with paperwork, an emergency custody order. He had taken Lyra. The school staff had checked the documents and everything had looked official. I was already reaching for my keys before she finished the sentence. I ran. That is the only honest word for it. I drove to the school and Tessa met me in the parking lot, breathless, still reading messages on her phone. The staff showed us the paperwork Graham had presented. Tessa photographed it quickly and studied the order number in the corner. "That number is wrong," she said. "This order doesn't exist. It's fake." We called the authorities immediately. A description of Graham's car went out within minutes. A toll camera east of Redwood Harbor caught him 40 minutes later leaving the city. Judge Rourke was called at home. She convened an emergency session that night, not the next morning, not at the court's earliest convenience, that night. When the session opened, her voice came through the speaker of the video conference like something solid and final. She had been patient through months of evidence. She had followed every legal step carefully. She had given the process time to work. Now, a child had been removed from her mother using forged documents. Mr. Vale, she said, has moved this case from family court to criminal court, and the room understood exactly what that meant. Graham was brought into court the following morning. He still tried to perform. He straightened his jacket and arranged his face into practiced sadness. "I was saving my child from a mentally ill mother," he told the judge. Judge Rourke did not raise her voice. She picked up the remote on her desk and played the recovered Mara Project files into the record, out loud for the whole room. The drafted emails, the symptom scripts, the wellness check timeline, the Lyra leverage folder. When it finished, the courtroom was completely silent. She looked at Graham. "So you planned her illness?"
He opened his mouth, then closed it. The performance cracked, just once, just briefly, but it was enough. Judge Rourke issued her orders without hesitation. Supervised contact only, criminal referrals for fraud, impersonation, and evidence tampering, immediate restoration of my full custodial rights. I did not gloat, I did not cry, I just breathed, long and slow, like someone who had been underwater for months and had finally broken the surface. As Graham was let out, I looked toward the back of the room. Sloane stood at the courtroom doors, looking directly at me. Sloane walked toward me slowly. The confidence from the elevator was completely gone. Her hands were unsteady when she stopped in front of me. She told me everything. Dane and Graham had planned it from the start. The documents, the clinic, the fake evaluation, the spyware. She had helped because Graham had promised her a future. She had delivered paperwork, she had rehearsed her lines in case anyone questioned her. I had enough to bury her. The banker's affidavit, her voice from the elevator recovered by Jai from a cloud backup. Instead, I said, "Tell the truth, all of it, then leave my life forever." She nodded and went to the authorities that afternoon. Judge Rourke finalized the custody plan in the weeks that followed. Stability for Lyra, supervision for Graham, boundaries backed by law. One evening, I sat with Lyra close against me and said softly, "Sometimes people lie about you, but the truth has a way of standing up." A letter arrived confirming the Harbor Light Trust was secured for Lyra's future alone. Money used as a weapon had become protection Graham could never touch. I stood at the window and looked out at Redwood Harbor's morning light. Free. Believed. Untouchable.